Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast. My name is Amanda.
So are you, Diane?
And we'll be your host for today. Just like every other day on this podcast.
That's not actually true. You weren't on the last one.
That's true. Did you guys miss me? I kind of missed me.
They're not here.
So what are we talking about today?
So the conversation today was kind of provoked by a little bit of insecurity I had. I was thinking about how it's been a while since I've traveled. Theoretically, although we moved to a new city, I don't really consider that traveling. And actually, we went somewhere last weekend, too.
We were in Charleston, South Carolina last weekend.
Just like we haven't been on a backpacking trip, a vagabonding trip in a while. And thinking about how really our states of mind have changed since the last time we got home from a big trip like that. Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot on the podcast about how going on a vagabonding trip or just a long-term traveling excursion.
I like this new word, vagabonding. That
I'm trying to use vagabonding instead of backpacking because people think of backpacking as hiking up in the woods with the hillbillies and things.
Do they?
I don't know.
I think it depends on who you're talking to.
That's what people tell me.
I think our crowd kind of gets backpacking, but vagabonding works for me.
Anyways, yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought.
So the conversation today is going to be around the things that we have come home with on our past trips, really like believing and having the things that are really present in our mind and how that has sort of changed since we've haven't gone for a while.
Yeah, and you can probably relate to the feeling of getting home after a trip and you've spent a lot of time on the trip thinking about how you want to live your life when you do get back. And then as you kind of get into the rhythm of everyday life at home with a job, with friends, with more demands on your time, some of those things that you really wanted to do kind of get lost. Yeah,
definitely. At the very back of my travel journal from 2011, before we came home, I wrote this massive list. Well, not massive. It was maybe like 10 things, 10 takeaways from traveling that I really wanted to incorporate into my life. And I actually looked at that list when we went to start traveling again. And I was like, whoa, I'm so disconnected from this. Like there was almost nothing on that list that I was doing. And I had all these intentions when I came home. Like, for example, one of them was that, you know, I realized while I was away how like big the world is, not on like an actual physical scale, but you know, there's so much more than the little bubble of my life that I was living in. And I met all these people who were doing so many cool things. And I was like, wow, the possibilities are really endless for me. Like, I don't want to get in a job and stay in it just because it's going to look good on my resume or because, you know, I feel like I have to, like I'm committing to myself that I'm going to leave a job if I'm not happy. And I looked at this 2 years later after putting up with a job for at least 6 months longer than I would have liked to be there, probably more like a year though. And I was like, wow, I just didn't even think about that at all. I was busy like, it doesn't make sense to quit now. We're leaving. Like, it'll look better on my resume after 2 years. Like rationalization after rationalization.
So what do you think? I guess we've talked about in the past on different episodes about how the first time we went on a long trip, we came back with these ideas of how things we wanted to change about our life and then kind of inserted ourselves back into the exact same situation that we had left. And over time, just it's almost as if that trip and changing perspective didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of almost like I feel like I became so disconnected from those thought patterns that, like, when I reread that list, it was like, did I actually write this?
Yeah,
like, it seems like a different person wrote this because that's not what I'm living right now.
Yeah, I had the same feeling after the second trip we took, looking back at my journal from 2011 and seeing, wow, all these things that I wanted to do with my life in 2011, like learning learning how to play the guitar, reading more, journaling more, avoiding the distraction of my computer, writing, and all this stuff I wanted to do, and I didn't really do any of it because I got into a job that I didn't find very fulfilling, got depressed, and just wasn't living the life that I wanted to be living at all. Yeah.
Do you have any sort of thoughts on like what sort of happens there? Like it obviously the same thing happened for both of us where we had the opportunity to see the world in a way that we'd never seen it before. And it gave us all these ideas for the people that we wanted to be. And then we came back home and kind of just, what happened?
So I think one of the first things that comes to mind is just when you're traveling, you have a bit more mental space. Mm-hmm. When you're at home and you have a job, or just take an average day for an example. You wake up, check your phone, you've got an email or a text message. That's information going into your mind. You sit down, you eat breakfast. Maybe you hear, maybe you have the TV on, you hear the news, you go to work, you listen to a podcast, you're at work. There's constantly information coming into your head. Mm-hmm. Leave work, go home, watch TV. Basically the entirety of the day, you have information coming into your head, coming into your mind, brain, whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're traveling, you have a lot more space to think. You have a lot less inputs coming in because you're probably not getting as many messages. You're probably not looking at your Facebook as much. You're probably not watching the news. You don't have to deal with work emails.
Yeah.
So you have a lot more mental space. And when you give yourself that mental space, I think these questions about life start to come up. You can kind of ignore them when you're busy all the time. Mm-hmm. They only come up in the middle of the night. But when you're traveling, they come up and you deal with them and you think about, wow, I really have these things about my life that I'm not happy with and that I want to change. And then you write them down and then you get back from traveling and you get back into this cycle of living a busy life. And it's easy to, once again, not think about those big life questions that you might not be addressing.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like the concept of life sort of just passing you by really quickly because you actually don't have the time or the mental capacity to kind of like think about your life on a day-to-day basis. I was sort of thinking about, this is like, it's not off topic, but it's random, how, in Harry Potter, how like Dumbledore has like that pensieve. It's that thing he takes the wand to like his head and he puts his memories in like the jar of goo or the like, I don't know, it's like a tub of memories. And I was just thinking about how it'd be really interesting to have something like that. And I know obviously like a journal is sort of a form of that where you can write things out, but how freeing would it be to actually declutter your mind? And to know that you had that sorted away somewhere, like, oh yeah, I had that experience, like, let me just go grab it. And you'd have so much free space in your mind.
But that really is the way that a journal works.
That's true.
Like even when we were in South America, I really adopted the habit of journaling. And it has wavered a bit since then, but pretty consistent with it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing the effect that writing down the thoughts that are in your head on paper can do for you. Even if you don't do anything with them ever. It's just very relieving. Like you do feel lighter when you do it.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. And I'm in the habit of journaling daily as well. And sometimes I just like get up and I write a list and it's just like all I write at the top is feelings. And I just write all these different things that I'm feeling at any time in the day. I usually like to do it in the morning because then I can kind of declutter first thing and kind of get, what I'm thinking or feeling on paper. And it's like crazy how much more in touch with myself I am that way. Which, if you're sitting here listening to this and you're like, what does this have to do with travel? Travel is a really great place to sort of develop those habits because you really have the time and the space to just think.
Yeah, and it's not like the reasons we like travel and want would suggest it to other people is because for both of us, it's made our lives substantially better. This isn't necessarily a podcast just about traveling. It's a podcast about life. Maybe.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And it's, so I have a personal blog outside of this podcast, and it was called My Love Affair with Travel. And I actually recently changed it to My Love Affair with Life. And I feel like traveling so much and having these really cool experiences and having the space from pretty much everything, like, you know, not that there's anything wrong with the people or the jobs I've worked or anything in my life, because there's not. It's just I've had the space away from them to really figure out who I am. And it's, you know, traveling has really helped me develop as I call it, a love affair with life, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And one of the things we've talked about from our personal experience is how coming back from the very first trip we took and still kind of thinking of it as this travel was this break from what ordinary life had to be. Came back, found a job, in like a career type job, and was just, oh yeah, we had this opportunity because we were young and didn't have responsibilities, but that'll never happen again. Mm-hmm. And then coming back the second time and saying this feeling of fulfillment and enjoyment, this feeling of being alive, of leading a self-directed life, that doesn't have to be something that just happens when you're traveling. You can have that in your day-to-day life, and then setting out to really try to make that happen for ourselves. Yeah,
definitely. And that kind of gets me thinking about sort of another thing that I can connect with in terms of really being in touch with while traveling and kind of losing sight of when coming home and being home for a while, is this idea that, you know, anything is possible. Because I feel like travel for me really connected me with those ideas. Like, for example, I've really loved writing my entire life, and I was that little kid who was constantly writing stories, and I've said for years and years that I want to write a book. And it kind of, I know between you and I, it became one of these things where you're like, why aren't you writing this book that you really want to write then? I'm like, oh, I'm just, you know, I'm letting it like fester and grow in my mind, when really it's just like, you know, it's fear driven. There's always excuses, like fear driven not to do it, always excuses. And then while I'm away traveling, I'm like thinking to myself about how, you know, why am I not writing this book? Why am I not making a career out of being a writer? Because I don't have all this inputs around me that it's impossible for me to do. And it was really cool coming home last year because I started working at Lululemon, and they have a huge culture around goal setting. And I set all these spectacular goals for myself, really believing that I could do anything that I wanted to do. And then as time went on, I slowly lost touch of that. And I was like, oh, you know, this writing thing's actually kind of hard. I don't know if I can do this. And it comes back to what we were talking about before.
Do you feel like it's that thought where you said, this writing thing's actually hard, I don't know if I can do it? Or do you think it's just that you don't think about it?
That's actually an interesting question.
Is that surprising?
Ryan just asked an interesting question. What? No, kidding. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it is that, you know, I'm working full time, trying to keep a social life. You know, health is very important to me. So exercising regularly, you know, maintaining a relationship with you. It's just a lot going on. And I feel like it was that, you know, months and months would go by, or at least a month or a few weeks would go by where I wouldn't even think about writing. And I'd be like, oh, I should really post on my blog. It's been like a couple weeks. And then it just kind of got to, oh, well, I haven't posted in like 4 months. Like, nobody's probably reading. I should probably just not bother. And then it's like, oh, well, like, you know, yeah, just not thinking about it for months and months because life is just happening. And then I think at some point when I did think about it, I was like, I'm not writing regularly enough. Like, there's no way I can do this. You know, like I just didn't have the mental capacity to be able to come home from a day of work, to do the other things I wanted to do, and then be able to write. It just didn't seem possible for me.
Do you think that, so you're kind of talking about having the energy. Do you think that having energy is a big difference between traveling and being home, working a job?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, obviously when I hear you say energy, I think like, oh, did the energy to go like run right now. But I think it's not really tied to your physical body. I think it's the mental capacity, like your mental energy, if that makes sense. Like I think that work
that's entirely what I meant.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify though. I think that for me, like work is very mentally exhausting and socializing is mentally exhausting. And I would come home after this day of work and I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Whereas, traveling is you get up and, the world is really your oyster, as cliche as it is, but you've got all these possibilities with your day. And it's like, do I want to spend, 4 hours in a cafe writing some ideas down? Like, sure, why not? I've got nothing else to do. And you don't have all these things that are draining you mentally. So to answer your question.
And one of the main questions we wrote down when we were planning for the podcast was, if you were talking to yourself immediately after traveling, like Amanda from summer of 2014, you came back from traveling, were in this clear-headed space with a the pretty good vision of what you wanted to do with your life. How would you what would you think about yourself now if you were talking to yourself?
If I was looking at myself or talking to myself now, I think I'd be like right in this moment. I think I'd be pretty happy with myself. I think the change down to Atlanta has been good for me in terms of kind of seeing once again that it is possible for me to do anything that I want to do with my life, and that, what I do with my life is really about what I choose to do, if that makes sense. And what I tell myself that I can and cannot do. So if I'm telling myself, oh, I can't write, I can't be a writer, then yeah, of course I can't. And if I'm telling myself like, yeah, I can, it might not be easy, but I can do it, then I think that I can. However, if you were to ask me, 6 weeks ago when I was kind of really bogged down by work and that sort of thing, I definitely would have told, I think my past self would have told my present self, but in the past, that, I needed to do something for myself to make space in my brain to have like mental capacity to do the things that I want to do. Does that make sense? I feel like that was a convoluted way of saying that.
I think I understand what you're saying.
One thing that I think that Amanda from July of 2014 would still be telling Amanda from August, what month is it? November 2015? August. Is this reminder of not needing material items. Because both times coming home from traveling after living out of a 70 or 80 liter backpack, I've just been so shocked by how much stuff I own. And then, as time goes on, I continue to consume.
Consume, what does that mean?
Consume goods. I purchase things.
Compile.
Yeah, I guess I'm not physically consuming them. Well, I'm physically consuming some stuff, but yeah, like buying clothes or books or kitchen utensils or just things. I don't know. I end up with so much stuff. And that's one of the great things about traveling, because it's such a hassle when you travel or you move to pack up all this stuff, and you end up really like cleansing your material items, like cleaning them out, which is great. And then coming home, it just, for anyone who's been backpacking, I'm sure you can really relate. And if you're feeling like your closet's really big, but you don't have any comprehension of how to make it smaller, go on a trip. Because after you've like lived out of a backpack, you come home and you're like, what is all this stuff in my room? What is all this stuff in my closet? Why do I have a dresser full of tank tops? It's so ridiculous, because you really don't need all those things. Or at least I don't need all those things. Yet, I'll get home from a trip and that'll be really top of mind for me. And then a few months will go by and I'm collecting more stuff again. So I think that's a big thing that Amanda of 2014 July of 2014 would be reminding my current state of self. What about you? What would Ryan of July 2014 tell Ryan of November 2015?
I think one of the things I've noticed about myself over the past year really is that sometimes my timelines are a bit ridiculous. So I think I expect things to happen way faster than they actually do happen. Without, like, I don't consciously say, like, oh, in 3 months I want to be doing this, but I kind of am hoping that, in 3 months our podcast would have X many downloads and I would have done all these things that I didn't really do. And I think over the last year I've kind of come to terms with that things and changes you want to make to your life, they take a while. Mm-hmm. So it's been the change of direction really happened when we were traveling last time, and now, like a year and a half later, some of those things are starting to come to fruition in terms of networking with people who really share my values and seeing the results of some of the work I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that I came back from traveling with is just a really good sense of what I should be stressed about and what I don't need to be stressed about.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's a question on a lot of podcasts. They'll ask, oh, do you have any advice you'd give to your younger self? I know they do this on like the Tim Ferriss will ask this question, and a couple of other podcasts ask the same question.
I've heard Tim Ferriss say that. He does it to like all of his guests, doesn't he?
Yeah. And it's funny because like I think I have the same answer that most people have, but in reverse. Like, whereas the younger me from a year and a half ago would say, like, chill out. Like, the things you're stressed about aren't really that important.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, traveling for a long time really does give you this sense, this kind of like almost like wise sense of what's really important in life, just because you have time to think about it. Mm-hmm. And maybe the thinking about it combined with the ayahuasca experience. But at that point in time, I just felt really like content. Mm-hmm. Not satisfied, but kind of at peace. And so I think I might say to myself now, like, this stressed life you're living isn't really a great life to be living.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of just like a chill out, relax. It'll happen in time.
Like, the stakes aren't that high.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice, I feel like, to give to your present self. That also resonates with me. One thing that I noticed myself doing as like time passed is like getting really caught up in things that just don't matter, which is kind of along the same lines of what you were saying. But I'm thinking a lot about like sort of like a he said, she said, like worrying about what people are thinking of me and wondering, what people think of me. Whereas it takes me a little bit of time to kind of decompress from that when I'm traveling. Like, it takes a month or so before I kind of get there. But I feel like travel really gives me this sense of freedom in a way that I don't experience at home, because I'm just very
freedom from what?
This freedom from worrying about what people think of me. Like, I'm just very like, yeah, this is me. If you don't like me, that's cool. I don't really give a fuck. And it's like, I could say that right now, but I actually do care, because the stakes are higher in terms of, making a friend or that sort of thing, even though they're actually not, because I don't want to be friends with people who don't like me for who I am. But it's sort of this like mentality in my head that it's really easy to lose sight of, what actually matters. And I know that when we were in Canmore, I found that I was like stressed over, how well I folded a stack of pants at Lululemon. And it's like, this just doesn't matter. In the big picture, this matters on a very, very, very minute scale. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how I think that having this kind of stream of people that you're meeting when you're traveling really makes you aware of how irrelevant it is what other people think of you. And then you maybe shift into a mode where you have a job and you're kind of relying on someone else's opinion of you for your sustenance, and it kind of stresses you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
That's one of the arguments I've read for developing multiple income streams as a young person, or attempting to develop multiple income streams, because then you can just be much more relaxed about what people think about you. If your boss doesn't like you, it doesn't really matter, because
you're not relying entirely on that one person to ensure that you like eat and pay rent every month. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. Multiple income streams. Gonna work on that. Yeah. So anything else that sort of past self would tell present self for you? Or anything else you'd like to, any advice you'd give to listeners who are maybe just returning from trips, or maybe you're kind of in the same place as us or they haven't traveled for a while?
So I think we've done a pretty good job of mixing up our lives since we got back and not getting stuck into like a stale routine.
Yeah.
That kind of leads, led to that unhappy place that I know, like I was in 2 years after coming back from traveling. And so 2013. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
So I just want to clarify what you're saying. So are you saying that that's something that you would suggest for people is, trying not to get down a rabbit hole in terms of jumping into maybe a job and just kind of getting sucked into that again, or getting sucked into that in general?
Yeah, I think that if you go away traveling and then when you're there, you see all these things about your life before that you didn't really like you didn't feel happy with your group of friends, you didn't feel fulfilled in your job, and you want something more out of life. You want to feel alive in your day-to-day life, like you feel alive when you're traveling. Mm-hmm. You can't expect to go back to the exact same situation and things to be different. So if you're going back to the same place you lived before and you're going to hang out with the same people and you're going to get a job that's maybe different but has a lot of similar qualities, you're probably not going to get much of a different result.
Yeah. So change something up.
Yeah. And I think that having kind of a continual degree of like flux to your life is good for making you feel alive.
Mm-hmm. We talk about that in the Death by Routine episode. Mm-hmm. I really do think, so when I say that I really don't like routine, I mean, I like having a morning routine where I get up and I meditate and I write in my journal every morning. And I like having some routine to my life. But I think it's important to realize that when you're no longer noticing things on your walk to work, or you're no longer observing beautiful mountains on your drive to and from work, and you're no longer present in what you're doing day to day, your routine has become deadly, I'm going to say. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. And it's real, unhappiness really isn't the trap that I want to avoid, or that I think people ought to be avoiding. It's just kind of like mediocrity. Mm-hmm. Like the feeling of going to work and you're not super unhappy about it, but you're not happy about it. Yeah. It's just kind of like whatever. And then over time it becomes more and more blah, and your life turns kind of gray. And then days turn into weeks, turn into months. It's been like a year and a half. You're like, why am I here? I don't know what's going on. Like, that's the thing that's tricky, and it's also kind of like a trap. Just decent.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes me think of, I was reading a story yesterday, and it was about a girl who suffers from endometriosis, which
I have no idea what that is.
It's like a disease of the uterus. Anyways, so this girl was talking about how she didn't get diagnosed with endometriosis until she was like well into her 20s, and she'd been suffering from it as soon as she got her first period when she was an early teenager. And basically the condition was so bad that for 1 week out of every month, she was basically incapacitated, right word? And she couldn't do like anything. So when she finally found out, she was like, 25% of each month she spent not being able to live her life. And so basically 25% of her life she can't ever get back. And that she wasn't actually able to do the things that she wanted to do or the things that she enjoyed. And I felt so sad reading the article. And then I was thinking about how when I worked an office job, I hated Mondays because it meant I had to deal with all these emails and all this crap. And, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday was fine. I looked like fine. It was okay. I looked forward to Fridays, but like Saturday, Sunday was like really where it was at. And it makes me so sad to think that that's how I was living my life. Because like when somebody's sick and they're missing out on their life, we think about, oh, that's so sad that they're losing this portion of our life. But then we don't think about when you're working a job that makes you unhappy for the most part, how much of your life you're really wasting away. And so that's a big thing that I think like I learned personally coming back from a trip and getting into a situation where I wasn't happy and not taking action right away to remove myself from that situation. And it's something that I'm, not going to do again.
Yeah, I know the other week I was riding up the elevator to the place where I'm working, and there was someone else in the elevator talking to a coworker from their office, and they were like, oh yeah, we survived to Friday. And it's a feeling I can relate to because I used to feel that way. But it's not a great place to be in when you feel your life is a burden.
Yeah.
And that it's burdensome 5 days a week, and then one day it's good and the next day is pretty good, but you're kind of worried about the next day.
Yeah. Like it's always like living in the future, and I don't know, maybe this is like too sort of like yogic and spiritual, but like, I don't know. I really like we have one life in this human body that we're in. Human body. We just don't even know what else is out there.
Okay.
But so we get like one life as this like human in this human experience. And that's like very yogic. So I'm sorry. Don't turn off the podcast. I promise I won't do it again. Or turn off the podcast. It's whatever to me. Just kidding. Don't turn it off. Anyways, we only get like one opportunity in this human body. And it's, why would we waste our time doing shit we don't like doing? Like if you're sitting in a job and you're hating your life for even 1 day a week, like just stop, do something else. That's what I think, at least. And I've been there. We all do it. It's hard when you're surrounded by people who are like, oh, just tough it out. It'll get better. It'll look good on your resume. You got to put your time in. Or if money's an actual legitimate concern, it's really hard to get out of that situation. But I would encourage people to really do things that they feel passionate about, because you only do live once, and as far as we know.
That's probably a topic that we're going into that could be covered in
another podcast. Maybe on another podcast show.
Yeah, not even an episode.
Join me on my other podcast. Just kidding. I don't know what's going on, but I feel weird right now. So I think that's coming across in this episode.
It's probably the caffeine.
Anyways, so something that I wish I had done when I had returned from my first trip, and that I would recommend to you listeners to do, is if you make a list of things, qualities about yourself or things you want to achieve in your life, write it down, maybe in colorful markers on a piece of paper, and stick it on your fridge and make it like a real thing in your life. Don't keep it in the back of your journal where you're not going to see it until maybe it's too late, or, you know, until you've been sucked down a rabbit hole that smells like shit. So just put it there as a reminder to yourself to live your life the way you want to live it, or the way that you imagined living it while you were abroad. That's my final remark. I'm not going to get any more weird on this episode.
I feel like we've gotten way too preachy already.
Do you have any advice for... That's my advice for my future self and what I wish that I had done in the past.
Mm-hmm. My advice is to go find a milkshake and drink it.
Sweet. That's great advice.
Unless you're lactose intolerant.
or diabetic.
Then you could go for some coconut ice cream.
Yeah, that's way better anyways. Just go for the coconut ice cream. So if you want to check out the show notes, which you should, they'll be at www.theworldwanders.com. Give us a like on Facebook, The World Wanders. Tweet us.
Yes, we are always looking to interact with people who listen to the podcast. So if you want to talk to us, you can find us on Facebook and send us messages, and then we'll send messages back. And then you can send us back messages. And then we might not respond again.
As always, thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.